The wolf's yellow eyes locked onto Maeve Brennan's face as she knelt in the dirt of the Colorado wilderness, speaking softly about the loneliness that lived in her chest like a stone. And the creature tilted its head as though it truly understood every word. "I know you're hungry," she whispered, reaching slowly into her worn leather satchel. "I've got some dried venison here. Not much, but it's yours if you want it." The wolf's ears pricked forward, and Maeve could have sworn she saw something like gratitude flicker across its scarred muzzle. "You've been through hell, haven't you, friend? That trap wound on your leg tells stories you probably wish you could forget." The September morning sun filtered through the pine trees surrounding her makeshift camp, casting golden light across the forest floor. Maeve had been traveling alone for 3 weeks now, making her way from Santa Fe toward Durango, Colorado, where her uncle's ranch supposedly waited. The year was 1876, and the West was still wild enough that a woman traveling alone raised eyebrows in every settlement she passed through. But Maeve had never been one to follow the expected path. She placed the venison on a flat rock between them and slowly backed away. The wolf watched her with those intelligent eyes before limping forward to claim the offering. Maeve smiled, her heart warming at the trust the creature showed. "That's it," she murmured. "I know what it's like to be wounded and wary. Took me years to trust anyone after my parents died. Still not sure I've mastered it, to be honest." The wolf tore into the meat, and Maeve settled back against a tree trunk, wrapping her faded shawl tighter around her shoulders. She'd been talking to animals for as long as she could remember. As a child in Boston, she'd carried on lengthy conversations with the neighborhood cats and the pigeons that nested in the eaves of her family's townhouse. Other children had laughed, called her strange. Even her own parents had worried, though they'd been kind about it. "You're 18 now, Maeve," her mother had said gently, just months before the fever took her. "You'll need to learn to connect with people, not just creatures." But people were complicated. People lied and disappointed and left. Animals, though, animals were honest in their needs and their affections. They didn't judge her for the red hair that fell in wild curls past her shoulders, or for the freckles that dusted her nose, or for the fact that she'd rather spend an afternoon in the stables than at a society tea party. A twig snapped somewhere behind her. Maeve's head whipped around, her hand instinctively moving to the small pistol tucked into her belt. The wolf's ears flattened, and a low growl rumbled from its throat. "More easy now." A deep voice called from the shadows between the trees. "Didn't mean to startle you, miss." A man emerged into the clearing, and Maeve's breath caught despite herself. He was massive, easily over 6 feet tall, with shoulders that seemed to span half the width of the trail. His arms, visible beneath rolled-up sleeves, were corded with muscle, and his chest strained against the fabric of his worn flannel shirt. Dark hair fell past his collar, slightly unkempt, and several days' worth of beard shadowed his strong jaw. But it was his eyes that held her attention, dark and assessing, yet somehow not unkind. "That wolf giving you trouble?" he asked, his voice carrying the rough edge of someone who spent more time talking to mountains than people. "No," Maeve said quickly, standing and positioning herself between the man and the animal. "He's no trouble at all. Just hungry and hurt." The man's eyebrows rose, and something that might have been amusement flickered across his weathered face. He looked to be in his mid-20s, his skin tanned from years under the sun. "That wolf's been terrorizing camps from here to Silverton for the past month. Killed 2 chickens just last week in Durango." "Because he's starving," Maeve said firmly. "Look at him. He's got an old trap wound that's healed poorly. He can't hunt properly. He's doing what he needs to survive." The mountain man studied her for a long moment, his dark eyes moving from her face to the wolf and back again. Then he did something unexpected. He laughed, not mockingly, but with genuine warmth that transformed his entire countenance. "Well, I'll be damned," he said, shaking his head. "You're talking to that beast like he's sitting across from you at Sunday dinner." Maeve felt heat rise to her cheeks. I was just... "No need to explain, miss." The man took a careful step forward, keeping his movements slow and deliberate. "Name's Sebastian Caldwell, but most folks call me Seb. I've got a cabin about 5 miles north of here, up in the high country." "Maeve Brennan," she replied, relaxing slightly. Something about his manner put her at ease, despite his imposing size. "I'm heading to Durango. My uncle has a ranch there." Sebastian's gaze swept over her meager camp, taking in the small bedroll, the dying fire, the single pack that held all her worldly possessions. "You're traveling alone?" "I'm perfectly capable of taking care of myself." "I don't doubt that," he said, and there was no condescension in his tone. "Any woman who can make friends with a wild wolf's got more backbone than most men I know. But these mountains can be unforgiving, especially with winter coming on." As if to punctuate his words, a cold breeze swept through the clearing, carrying with it the scent of distant snow. Maeve suppressed a shiver. "I'll be fine," she insisted. "I've made it this far, haven't I?" Sebastian nodded slowly, then crouched down, making himself less imposing. To Maeve's surprise, he pulled a piece of jerky from his own pack and extended it toward the wolf. "Here, friend," he said quietly. "Reckon you could use a bit more." The wolf hesitated, then limped forward and gently took the offering from Sebastian's hand. The mountain man examined the animal's injured leg with a practiced eye. "That trap did a number on him," Sebastian observed. "Probably got infected, healed wrong. He's compensating, but it's gotta hurt." He glanced up at Maeve. "You've got a good heart, Miss Brennan. Most people would have shot him on sight." "He's just trying to live," Maeve said softly. "Same as the rest of us." Sebastian stood, brushing dirt from his leather pants. "Durango's a full day's ride from here, maybe more on foot. The trail's not too bad if you know the way, but there's a storm rolling in." He paused, seeming to wrestle with something. "My cabin's got a spare room. You're welcome to wait out the weather there. I can take you into Durango once it clears." Every cautious instinct Maeve possessed screamed at her to decline. She didn't know this man, didn't know his intentions. But something in his steady gaze, in the way he'd treated the wolf with respect rather than fear, made her want to trust him. "Why would you help me?" she asked bluntly. Sebastian's expression grew serious. "Because I had a sister once. She died crossing these mountains in a spring storm, traveling alone when she shouldn't have been. If someone had offered her shelter, maybe she'd still be here." The pain in his voice was raw and real. "I can't change what happened to her, but I can make sure another woman doesn't suffer the same fate." Maeve felt her resistance crumbling. The sky was indeed darkening, and the temperature was dropping rapidly. Pride was one thing, but foolishness was another. "All right," she said finally. "Thank you, Mr. Caldwell. I appreciate the kindness." "Just Seb," he corrected with a slight smile. "And it's no kindness, just common sense." He looked down at the wolf, who was licking the last traces of meat from his muzzle. "Your friend there can come too, if he's of a mind. I've got a lean-to out back where he can shelter." Maeve blinked in surprise. "You'd let him stay? After you said he's been causing trouble?" "Figure if he's got a full belly and a warm place to sleep, maybe he'll leave the chickens alone." Sebastian reasoned. He tilted his head, studying the wolf with an expression Maeve couldn't quite read. Besides, any creature that's earned your trust has probably earned mine. They gathered Maeve's few belongings and set off through the forest, following a narrow trail that wound upward into the mountains. Sebastian moved with surprising grace for such a large man, navigating the rocky terrain with the ease of someone who knew every stone and root. Maeve found herself watching the play of muscles beneath his shirt as he walked, the way his broad shoulders seemed to carry strength as naturally as the mountains themselves carried snow. The wolf followed at a distance, limping but determined. Occasionally, Maeve would glance back and offer him quiet words of encouragement. "You talk to all animals, or just the dangerous ones?" Sebastian asked after they'd been walking for an hour. "All of them," Maeve admitted. "Birds, horses, even mice. I always have." "And they talk back?" Maeve hesitated, expecting mockery. "Not in words, but they understand in their way. And I understand them." Sebastian nodded thoughtfully. "I believe it. There's an old Ute elder who lives on the far side of the valley. He once told me that some people are born with hearts that listen, not just hear. Said those people can speak to the world in ways the rest of us can't." He glanced at her, something warm in his expression. "Shows you've got a heart that listens, Miss Brennan." Something fluttered in Maeve's chest at his words, at the complete lack of judgment in them. "Most people think I'm mad. Most people are fools." They climbed higher, and the first fat snowflakes began to fall. Sebastian picked up the pace, and Maeve hurried to keep up, her legs burning with the effort. Just when she thought she couldn't go another step, the cabin came into view. It was larger than she'd expected, built of solid logs with a stone chimney from which smoke already curled. A small barn stood nearby, and chickens pecked around a well-maintained yard. This wasn't the rough hermit's shelter she'd imagined. This was a home, carefully tended and clearly loved. "It's beautiful," she breathed. "It's dry and warm, which is what matters when the snow starts," Sebastian said practically, but she could hear the pride in his voice. "Come on, let's get you inside before this storm really hits." He led her up onto the covered porch and pushed open the heavy wooden door. The interior was dim until Sebastian moved to light several lanterns, revealing a large room with a stone fireplace, a sturdy table and chairs, and shelves lined with books. A door on the far wall presumably led to a bedroom, and a ladder near the back climbed to what looked like a loft. "Make yourself comfortable," Sebastian said, moving to stoke the fire. "The loft's all yours. There's blankets up there, and I'll heat some water if you want to wash. Supper will be ready in about an hour." "You don't have to go to all this trouble," Maeve protested, though in truth she was exhausted and cold. "No trouble. I was making food anyway." He paused, then added, "Let me get your friend settled first. That wolf's going to need more care if that leg's going to heal proper." Together, they went back outside where the wolf waited, wary but patient. Sebastian approached slowly, speaking in low, calm tones. "All right, friend. Let's have a look at you." Maeve watched in amazement as the mountain man gently examined the wolf's injured leg, his large hands surprisingly tender. The animal tensed, but didn't snap or retreat. "It's an old wound," Sebastian confirmed. "Healed crooked. I can't fix the bone, but I've got a salve that might help with the pain. And if we keep him fed, he'll regain his strength." He led the wolf to the lean-to behind the cabin, which was dry and filled with fresh hay. Sebastian provided water and more food, then applied a pungent ointment to the scarred leg. Through it all, Maeve knelt nearby, murmuring encouragement to the animal. "You're good with him," she observed. Spent a lot of time with animals up here, Sebastian replied. They're honest company. Never pretend to be something they're not. They returned to the cabin, just as the snow began falling in earnest. Sebastian set about preparing supper, moving around the kitchen area with practiced efficiency. Maeve climbed to the loft to set down her pack and found it cozy and clean, with a real bed covered in thick quilts. Through the small window, she could see the snow coming down harder, already beginning to accumulate. She descended the ladder to find Sebastian stirring something that smelled absolutely divine in a pot over the fire. Venison stew, he explained. Nothing fancy, but it's hot and filling. It smells wonderful, Maeve said honestly. Can I help with anything? There's bread in that box there if you want to slice it. They worked together in comfortable silence, and soon they were seated at the table with steaming bowls before them. Maeve hadn't realized how hungry she was until the first bite hit her tongue. She had to stop herself from devouring the entire bowl in seconds. When did you last eat? Sebastian asked, frowning slightly. Yesterday morning, Maeve admitted. I've been trying to conserve my supplies. His frown deepened. Eat as much as you want. I've got plenty. As they ate, they talked. Sebastian explained that he'd been living in the mountains for 5 years, trapping and hunting, trading furs in Durango a few times a year. He'd built the cabin himself, seeking solitude after his sister's death and their parents' subsequent passing from heartbreak. I needed to get away from people for a while, he said quietly. Needed to figure out how to live with the grief. The mountains don't ask questions. They just let you be. And have you? Maeve asked gently. Figured out how to live with it? Sebastian was quiet for a moment, his dark eyes distant. Some days are better than others. But yeah, I reckon I have. The pain doesn't go away, but you learn to carry it different. Maeve understood that all too well. My parents died 2 years ago. Yellow fever swept through Boston. They were gone within a week of each other. I'm sorry, Sebastian said, and she could hear that he truly meant it. I stayed with my aunt for a while, but she wanted me to marry her business partner's son. He was 45 and cruel to his horses. Maeve's voice hardened. I refused, and she said I was being foolish and ungrateful. So I left. My uncle in Durango is my father's brother. He wrote once saying I'd always have a home with him if I needed it. That took courage, coming all this way alone. Or stupidity, Maeve said with a self-deprecating laugh. I'm still not sure which. Courage, Sebastian said firmly. Definitely courage. Their eyes met across the table, and Maeve felt that flutter in her chest again, stronger this time. There was something about this man, this gentle giant who lived alone in the mountains and treated wounded wolves with tenderness, that called to something deep inside her. The storm raged outside for 3 days. During that time, Maeve and Sebastian fell into an easy rhythm. They cooked together, talked for hours, and cared for the wolf, whom Maeve had started calling Gray for his silver-tipped fur. Sebastian showed her his collection of books, accumulated over years of trading, and was delighted to discover she shared his love of reading. They took turns reading aloud by the fire, their voices weaving stories into the howling wind. Maeve learned that Sebastian was 26, that he'd grown up on a ranch in Wyoming, that he'd once dreamed of studying medicine before his family's tragedies had sent him to the mountains. He was intelligent and thoughtful, with a dry humor that caught her off guard and made her laugh. For his part, Sebastian seemed fascinated by Maeve's gift with animals. He watched as she coaxed Gray into letting her examine his teeth, as she convinced the chickens to come to her hand even in the snow, as she calmed his nervous mare with nothing but soft words and gentle touches. It's like watching magic, he said one evening as they sat by the fire. It's not magic, Maeve insisted. It's just paying attention, listening to what they're really saying instead of just hearing noise. Most people never learn that skill with other people, let alone animals, Sebastian observed. He was whittling a piece of wood, his large hands moving with surprising delicacy. You're special, Maeve. The way he said her name, low and warm, made her skin tingle. She'd stopped insisting he use Miss Brennan after the first day, and the growing familiarity between them felt both natural and thrilling. On the third night, as the storm finally began to abate, they sat closer than usual by the fire. Sebastian had just finished reading a passage from a book of poetry, and the words hung in the air between them, intimate and charged. Can I ask you something? Maeve said softly. Anything. Do you ever get lonely up here? Sebastian set down the book, his expression turning thoughtful. I did at first. That was part of the point, I suppose. I wanted to feel the loneliness, to sit with it until it couldn't hurt me anymore. He turned to look at her, firelight dancing in his dark eyes. But these past few days, with you here, I've realized something. I'm not lonely when you're around, and I think I'm going to miss that feeling when you're gone. Maeve's breath caught. I'll miss it too, she admitted. Miss this. Miss talking to someone who doesn't think I'm strange. I think you're remarkable, Sebastian said quietly. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and tucked a stray curl behind her ear. His fingers were calloused, but gentle, and the touch sent shivers down her spine. I've never met anyone like you, Maeve Brennan. I've never met anyone like you either, she whispered. The space between them seemed to shrink, or maybe they were leaning closer without conscious thought. Sebastian's hand moved from her hair to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing softly across her skin. I shouldn't, he murmured, but he wasn't pulling away. You're supposed to go to Durango, to your uncle. I know, Maeve breathed, but she wasn't pulling away either. But I want to kiss you more than I've wanted anything in a very long time. Then kiss me. He did. His lips met hers with a gentleness that belied his size and strength, tender and questioning. Maeve responded without hesitation, her hands coming up to rest against his broad chest, feeling his heart racing beneath her palms. The kiss deepened, and Sebastian's arms came around her, pulling her closer. She felt safe and desired and utterly alive. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Sebastian rested his forehead against hers. Stay, he said roughly. Don't go to Durango. Stay here with me. Sebastian, I can't just... I know it's crazy. I know we've only known each other 3 days. But I've never felt this way about anyone, Maeve. You walk into my life and suddenly everything makes sense again. The cabin doesn't feel so empty. The mountains don't feel so vast. His voice was raw with emotion. I'm falling in love with you. Maybe I already have. Maeve's heart was pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. I feel it too, she confessed. This pull toward you, like I was meant to end up here, meant to find you. Then stay, Sebastian said again. Please. What about my uncle? He's expecting me. We'll go to Durango tomorrow. We'll explain. And if he's the good man your father thought he was, he'll understand. Sebastian pulled back just enough to look into her eyes. I'm not trying to trap you here. If you want to go to your uncle's ranch, I'll take you there and wish you well. But if there's any part of you that wants to build a life here with me, then I'm asking you to give us a chance. Maeve thought of the ranch in Durango, of her uncle whom she'd never met, of the uncertain future that awaited her there. Then she thought of the past 3 days, of the ease and joy she'd found with Sebastian, of the way her heart had seemed to recognize his from the first moment. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I'll stay." Sebastian's face broke into a grin so wide and genuine, it transformed him completely. He kissed her again, then laughed and lifted her right off the ground, spinning her in a circle. Maeve laughed too, giddy with the sudden rightness of her decision. "We'll do this proper," Sebastian promised, setting her down but keeping his arms around her. "I'll court you, take my time. We'll get to know each other right. And when you're ready, if you're ready, we'll get married in Durango's church." "I'm already ready," Maeve said, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. "I know it sounds mad, but I am." "Then we'll ride to Durango as soon as the trails are clear. We'll visit your uncle, explain the situation, and find a preacher." His expression grew serious. "I'll spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret choosing me, Maeve." "I know you will," she said simply. They stayed up late that night, talking about the future. Sebastian explained that his trapping brought in good money, and he had savings put aside. They could expand the cabin, add rooms for children someday. There was good hunting in these mountains, and a stream full of trout. They could raise chickens and maybe a few goats. It wouldn't be an easy life, but it would be theirs. Maeve shared her own dreams, her desire for a garden where she could grow herbs and vegetables, her hope that maybe she could help other animals in the area who needed care. Sebastian listened to every word, his eyes never leaving her face, as though she was the most fascinating person he'd ever encountered. When they finally retired for the night, Sebastian to his room and Maeve to the loft, she lay awake for a long time, listening to the wind whistle around the cabin. Her entire life had changed in the span of days. She'd come to these mountains alone and frightened, and now she was planning a future with a man she barely knew but somehow understood completely. It should have terrified her. Instead, it felt like coming home. The morning dawned clear and bright, the world transformed into a pristine wonderland of white. Sebastian made breakfast while Maeve checked on Gray, who was notably stronger already. The wolf's tail actually wagged when he saw her, and he pressed his massive head against her shoulder in what could only be called an embrace. "You're getting better," she told him, stroking his fur. "Soon that leg won't hurt so much. But you have to promise me something. No more stealing chickens from hard-working people. You stay here with us, and we'll make sure you never go hungry again. Deal?" Gray huffed softly, his yellow eyes warm. "I'll take that as a yes." After breakfast, Sebastian saddled his mare, a sturdy bay named Juniper, and they set out for Durango. The trail was slick with snow but passable, and Sebastian navigated it with the confidence of someone who'd ridden it hundreds of times. Maeve sat behind him, her arms wrapped around his waist, her cheek pressed against the solid warmth of his back. They reached Durango by afternoon. The town was bigger than Maeve had expected, bustling with activity despite the recent storm. They found her uncle's ranch on the outskirts, a sprawling property with a well-maintained house and several outbuildings. Thomas Brennan turned out to be a weathered man in his 50s, with kind eyes and her father's smile. He welcomed Maeve with open arms, literally, pulling her into a tight embrace. "Thank God you're safe," he said fervently. "I got your letter saying you were coming, but when the storm hit, I feared the worst. I would have been caught in it if not for Sebastian," Maeve said, introducing the mountain man. "He gave me shelter and kept me safe." Thomas shook Sebastian's hand vigorously. Then I owe you a debt, young man. Come inside, both of you. Let's get you warm and fed. Over coffee and fresh-baked bread, Maeve explained the situation. She watched her uncle's face carefully, trying to gauge his reaction as she told him she'd fallen in love with Sebastian and wanted to stay in the mountains rather than settle at the ranch. Thomas was quiet for a long moment after she finished. Then he sighed and reached across the table to take her hand. "Your father was my younger brother," he said gently, "and I loved him dearly. When he died, I promised myself I'd look after you if you ever needed it. I meant that promise, Maeve. You have a home here for as long as you want it." "But," Maeve prompted, hearing the unspoken word, "but I also promised myself I'd respect your choices, even if I didn't understand them. If this is what you want, if this man makes you happy, then I'll support you." He turned to Sebastian. "I assume your intentions are honorable." "Completely," Sebastian said firmly. "I plan to marry her as soon as possible, if she'll have me." "I will," Maeve confirmed, squeezing Sebastian's hand. Thomas nodded slowly. "Then I suppose I should welcome you to the family, Sebastian. Take care of my niece. She's all I have left of my brother." "I'll protect her with my life," Sebastian promised, and the gravity in his voice made it clear he meant every word. They stayed in Durango for 2 weeks. Thomas insisted they have a proper wedding, and the whole town seemed to come together to make it happen. The local seamstress altered a beautiful cream-colored dress for Maeve, and the preacher cleared his schedule for the ceremony. During those 2 weeks, Maeve and Sebastian spent their days preparing for their life together. They bought supplies for the cabin, fabric for curtains, seeds for spring planting. Sebastian commissioned a larger bed from the town's carpenter and purchased a china set that made Maeve gasp with delight. "It's too much," she protested. "Nothing's too much for you," Sebastian insisted. They also spent time getting to know each other in daylight, away from the intimate cocoon of the cabin. Sebastian introduced her to his few friends in town, and Maeve met the wives and daughters of local ranchers. She found herself welcomed warmly, especially when word spread of her gift with animals. "Could you take a look at my mare?" one rancher asked. "She's been acting strange, and the veterinarian can't figure out what's wrong." Maeve visited the horse and spent an hour just being with her, listening. Finally, she turned to the rancher. "She's pregnant," Maeve said with certainty. "And she's scared because she had trouble with her last foaling. She needs reassurance and extra care when her time comes." The rancher had the veterinarian confirm it. And sure enough, the mare was indeed pregnant. Word of Maeve's abilities spread quickly after that, and she found herself with a steady stream of animals to help. Sebastian watched it all with pride, never once suggesting she was strange or that she should stop. Instead, he supported her completely, building her a small shelter where she could work with animals who needed more intensive care. The day of the wedding arrived, cold but clear. Maeve stood in her uncle's house, looking at herself in the mirror, hardly recognizing the happy woman staring back. Her red hair had been tamed into an elegant style, and the cream dress fit her perfectly. She looked like someone's bride, Sebastian's bride. Thomas appeared in the doorway, tears in his eyes. "You look just like your mother on her wedding day," he said hoarsely. "She'd be so proud of you, Maeve." "I wish she could be here," Maeve whispered. "I think she is, in her way." Thomas walked her to the church through streets lined with well-wishers. The small building was packed with people, far more than Maeve would have expected, given that she'd only been in town 2 weeks. But that was the West, she was learning. Communities came together for celebrations, especially weddings. And then she saw Sebastian standing at the altar, and everything else faded away. He wore new clothes, a dark suit that somehow made him look even larger and more imposing. His hair had been trimmed but still fell past his collar, and his beard was neatly groomed. But it was his expression that stole her breath. He was looking at her like she was the answer to every prayer he'd ever whispered into the mountain wind. The ceremony was simple but beautiful. They spoke their vows in steady voices, promising to love and cherish each other through whatever trials life might bring. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Sebastian kissed her with a tenderness that brought tears to more than one eye in the congregation. The celebration afterward was held at Durango's largest saloon, which had been cleaned and decorated for the occasion. There was music and dancing and more food than Maeve had seen in months. Sebastian never left her side, his hand always on the small of her back or holding hers, as though he couldn't bear to be separated, even by inches. "Happy?" he asked as they swayed together to a slow song. "Happier than I knew was possible," Maeve answered honestly. "Good, because I plan to spend every day of our lives making you even happier." As the sun set and the celebration continued, Maeve found herself outside for a moment of quiet. The stars were beginning to appear, bright and infinite in the clear Colorado sky. She heard footsteps behind her and turned to find Sebastian approaching with 2 cups of cider. "Needed some air?" he asked, handing her a cup. "Just taking it all in," she said. "A month ago I was in Boston, miserable and alone. Now I'm married to an incredible man in the most beautiful place I've ever seen. It feels like a dream." "It's real," Sebastian assured her. He set down his cup and pulled her close, wrapping her in his warmth. "This is real, Maeve. You and me, our life together, all of it." She tilted her face up to his, and he kissed her under the stars, deep and promising. When they broke apart, both breathless, Maeve rested her head against his chest and listened to the steady thump of his heart. "I love you, Sebastian Caldwell," she said softly. "I love you, Maeve Caldwell," he replied, and the new name sent a thrill through her. They spent their wedding night at the town's small hotel, a luxury that made Maeve laugh with delight. Sebastian carried her over the threshold of their room, both of them grinning like fools, and set her down gently beside the bed. "I'll be gentle," he promised, his voice rough with desire and tenderness. "I trust you," Maeve said simply, and she did, completely. He made love to her with a patience and care that brought tears to her eyes, his strong hands impossibly tender, his kisses worshipful. And when they finally lay tangled together in the aftermath, sweat slicked and sated, Maeve knew with absolute certainty that she'd made the right choice. This man, this life, was exactly where she was meant to be. They returned to the cabin a week later, laden with supplies and wedding gifts. Gray greeted them enthusiastically, his tail wagging so hard his entire back half moved with it. His leg was healing well, and he could put weight on it now without wincing. "Looks like someone missed us," Sebastian observed, scratching behind the wolf's ears. "Of course he did," Maeve said, kneeling to hug the animal. "We're his family now." The word hung in the air between them, warm and significant. Family. They were building one, the 2 of them and whatever children might come, along with the animals they'd care for. The winter settled in around them, deep and cold. But the cabin was warm and snug. Sebastian had been right about his preparations. They had plenty of food stored, plenty of wood for the fire. The days fell into a comfortable rhythm. Sebastian would check his trap lines while Maeve tended the chickens and worked with animals who needed her help. Evenings were spent by the fire, reading or talking or simply being together. Maeve discovered she loved the work of making a home. She sewed curtains for the windows and wove rugs for the floors. She experimented with cooking, learning to make bread and preserve vegetables. Sebastian proved to be an attentive and appreciative husband, praising her efforts even when they didn't turn out quite right. "I think you might have burned the biscuits a bit," he said diplomatically one evening, examining a particularly blackened specimen. "A bit?" Maeve laughed. "They're practically charcoal." "Well, I'm sure they're very nutritious charcoal," Sebastian said with a grin, pulling her into his lap. "Besides, I didn't marry you for your biscuits." "Oh? What did you marry me for?" "For your heart," he said, suddenly serious. "For the way you see the world. For the way you make me want to be better." He kissed her softly. "For the way you talk to wolves and chickens with equal respect. For your courage and your kindness and your absolutely terrible baking." Maeve swatted his shoulder, laughing. "I'll get better at the baking." "I hope not. I kind of like being the superior cook in this marriage." They made love that night on the rug before the fire, slow and sweet, learning each other's bodies with the patience of people who knew they had a lifetime to explore. Afterward, wrapped in blankets in each other's arms, they talked about the spring. "I want to expand the garden," Maeve said. "Plant herbs for medicine, vegetables for preserving, maybe some flowers too, just for beauty." "I'll build you raised beds," Sebastian promised. "We can start the seedlings inside once the weather warms a bit. And I'd like to build a proper shelter for animals who need help. Something bigger than the lean-to, with separate spaces for different creatures." "We'll do it together," Sebastian said. "Whatever you need, we'll make it happen." The months passed, winter gradually giving way to spring. The snow melted, revealing the earth beneath, ready for renewal. True to his word, Sebastian built raised beds for Maeve's garden and a larger shelter for her animal work. Word of her abilities had spread through the surrounding mountains, and trappers and ranchers began bringing her injured or sick animals. She helped a bear cub whose mother had been killed, nursing it back to health before releasing it back into the wild. She treated horses with mysterious lameness, dogs with wounds that wouldn't heal, even an eagle with a broken wing. Every creature that came under her care received her full attention and love, and Sebastian supported her completely, helping her lift heavy animals or holding them still during treatments. "You're making a real difference," he told her one evening as they watched a recovered fox trot back into the forest. "These animals are lucky to have you." "We're lucky to have each other," Maeve corrected, leaning into his warmth. Summer brought long, golden days and the discovery that Maeve was pregnant. She'd suspected for a few weeks, but when the town doctor confirmed it during a visit to Durango, she felt equal parts joy and terror. Sebastian's reaction was everything she could have hoped for. He picked her up and spun her around, laughing with pure delight, then immediately set her down, worried he'd been too rough. "I'm not made of glass," Maeve protested, but she was laughing too. "You're carrying our child," Sebastian said, his voice full of wonder. He placed his large hand on her still flat stomach. "Our baby is growing in there." "Are you happy?" Maeve asked, suddenly needing to hear him say it. "Happy doesn't begin to cover it," Sebastian said fervently. He dropped to his knees and pressed his face against her belly. "Hello in there, little one. I'm your papa, and I already love you more than I knew was possible." Tears streamed down Maeve's face at the sight of this strong, powerful man kneeling before her, speaking to their unborn child with such tenderness. She ran her fingers through his hair, overwhelmed with love. The pregnancy progressed smoothly, though Maeve was often tired. Sebastian took on more of the household tasks, insisting she rest whenever she needed to. He was protective without being overbearing, checking on her constantly, but trusting her judgment about her own body. "I'm going to be the size of a bear by the time this baby comes," Maeve complained one autumn afternoon, looking down at her expanding belly. "You're going to be the most beautiful bear in Colorado," Sebastian said, kissing her soundly. As winter approached again, they made preparations for the birth. The midwife from Durango came to visit, pronouncing Maeve healthy and the baby positioned well. She agreed to come stay with them when Maeve's time grew near. "First babies can take a while," the midwife warned, "but you're young and strong. You should do just fine." The baby arrived on a snowy night in February 1877, after 12 hours of labor that left Maeve exhausted but triumphant. Sebastian had stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand, supporting her back, offering water and encouragement. When the midwife finally placed the squalling infant in Maeve's arms, they both wept. "A boy," the midwife announced, "healthy and strong, with a good set of lungs on him." "A son," Sebastian breathed, staring at the tiny face with wonder. "We have a son." They named him Thomas, after Maeve's uncle, with the middle name of Daniel, after Sebastian's father. Little Thomas had his father's dark hair and his mother's blue eyes, and from the moment he entered the world, he had both of his parents completely wrapped around his tiny fingers. Sebastian proved to be a devoted father, rising with Maeve for nighttime feedings, changing diapers without complaint, spending hours just holding his son and talking to him about the mountains and the animals and how much he was loved. "You're a natural at this," Maeve observed one morning, watching her husband cradle Thomas with practiced ease. "I always wanted to be a father," Sebastian admitted. "After my sister died, I thought I'd never get the chance. But then you walked into my life, and suddenly everything I'd given up on seemed possible again." Maeve crossed the room and wrapped her arms around both of them, her heart so full it ached. "I love you," she whispered. "Both of you. So much." As Thomas grew, it became clear he'd inherited his mother's gift with animals. Gray, who still lived with them though his leg had healed as much as it ever would, appointed himself the baby's guardian. The wolf would lie beside Thomas's cradle, keeping watch, and when the baby cried, Gray would howl softly until one of his parents came. "That wolf loves our son as much as we do," Sebastian marveled. "Animals know," Maeve said simply. "They recognize when they're part of a family." The years passed in a blur of joy and hard work. They added onto the cabin, creating more space as their family grew. Maeve became pregnant again when Thomas was 2, this time with twins, a boy and a girl they named Samuel and Rose. Sebastian built cribs and rocking chairs and seemed to grow even more patient and gentle with each child. Maeve's work with animals continued to flourish. She became known throughout the region as the woman who could communicate with creatures, and people came from miles around seeking her help. She never charged for her services, but grateful clients always left gifts: food, supplies, handmade items, or simply their thanks. "You've built something amazing here," Thomas Brennan told her during a visit when little Thomas was 4. "Your parents would be so proud." "I hope so," Maeve said, watching her children play in the yard under Gray's watchful eye. Samuel was chasing butterflies while Rose sat in the dirt, having a serious conversation with a beetle. "I know I'm proud. This life, this family, it's everything I never knew I needed." Sebastian came around the corner of the cabin, carrying an armload of firewood. His hair was starting to show threads of silver at the temples, and his face bore the lines of a man who'd spent years in the sun and wind. But he was still strong and vital, his body still powerful from years of physical labor. Papa! The children shrieked, abandoning their play to rush toward him. Sebastian dropped the wood carefully and scooped up all three children, one in each arm and one perched on his shoulders, making them giggle with delight. He caught Maeve's eye over their heads, and the look they shared was one of complete understanding and love. This was their life. This was their family, and it was absolutely perfect. More children came over the years. Another daughter, Grace, when the twins were 3, a son, James, 2 years after that. The cabin expanded again and again, until it was more like a small house, filled with laughter and noise and love. Sebastian taught his sons to trap and hunt and survive in the mountains. But he also taught them gentleness, showing them how their mother communicated with animals and why it was important to treat all creatures with respect. The girls learned the same lessons, because Sebastian and Maeve believed all their children should know how to thrive in their mountain home. "You're raising them different than most folks do," one visiting trapper observed. "We're raising them to be kind and capable," Maeve replied, "to understand that strength and gentleness aren't opposites, and that the world is full of creatures that deserve our care." "You're raising them right then," the trapper said with approval. Thomas Brennan visited regularly, bringing gifts and news from Durango. He never remarried after his wife's death years before. But he found joy in being uncle and grandfather to Maeve's growing brood. He helped Sebastian with heavy work around the property and told the children stories of their grandparents and the family they'd never known. "You've made a good life here," he told Maeve on one such visit. "Your father would be pleased to know you found happiness." "I found more than happiness," Maeve said, watching Sebastian teach young Thomas and Samuel how to carve wood. "I found home." Gray lived to the remarkable age of 14, passing peacefully in his sleep one spring night. They buried him on a hill overlooking the cabin, and all the children wept. Sebastian carved a marker. "Gray, faithful friend and guardian, beloved member of our family." "Why did he have to die?" little Grace asked through her tears. "Because everything that lives eventually returns to the earth," Maeve explained gently. "But he had a good life, full of love and full bellies and sunshine. And he'll always be part of our family, even if we can't see him anymore." "Will we see him again?" Rose asked. "I believe we will," Sebastian said, pulling his daughter close. "I believe all good creatures find each other again, somehow." More animals came to take Gray's place, not as replacements, but as new members of their growing menagerie. A 3-legged dog named Scout, a blind horse named Star, who couldn't work but whom they kept anyway, because she deserved a peaceful retirement, countless chickens, some of whom the children named and treated like pets. The years turned into decades. The children grew into strong, capable adults, each finding their own path, but never straying far from the mountains that had shaped them. Thomas became a veterinarian, studying in Denver, but returning to practice near Durango, carrying on his mother's work with animals in a more formal capacity. Samuel became a rancher, buying land near his uncle Thomas. The twins, Rose and Grace, both married local men and settled nearby. James, the youngest, followed his father into trapping, but with a focus on conservation, helping to manage wildlife populations sustainably. Sebastian and Maeve grew old together, their love deepening with each passing year. Sebastian's hair turned silver, and his powerful frame became slightly stooped with age. But he remained strong and devoted. Maeve's red hair faded to a soft copper streaked with white, and her face bore the lines of a life well lived and full of laughter. They became grandparents, then great-grandparents, the cabin filling regularly with the noise of family gatherings. Sebastian built an addition just for those occasions, a large room where everyone could gather around an enormous table he'd crafted himself. "Remember when it was just the two of us in that tiny cabin?" Maeve said one evening, watching their extended family through the window. "I remember falling in love with a woman who talked to wolves," Sebastian replied, wrapping his arms around her from behind, his chin resting on top of her head. "Best decision I ever made, inviting you to stay. Best decision I ever made, saying yes." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over the mountains that had been their home for so many years. Through the window, they could see their children and grandchildren playing, eating, laughing. The family they'd built together. "Do you have any regrets?" Sebastian asked quietly. Maeve turned in his arms to face him, reaching up to touch his weathered cheek. "Not a single one. You?" "Only that I didn't find you sooner," he said, kissing her softly. "But we've had a good run, haven't we?" "The best." On a clear autumn morning in 1921, Sebastian Caldwell passed away in his sleep at the age of 71. He died as he'd lived for the past 45 years, with Maeve's hand in his, surrounded by the mountains he loved and the family he'd built. The funeral drew people from throughout the region, former clients who remembered his kindness, fellow trappers who'd respected his skills, and more family than Maeve had ever imagined they'd create. Person after person shared stories of Sebastian's generosity, his strength, his gentle nature, his unwavering devotion to his wife and children. "He was the best man I ever knew," Thomas said during the eulogy, his voice breaking. The eldest son had inherited his father's size and strength, but also his tender heart. "He taught me that being strong means being gentle, that protecting something means understanding it first, and that the greatest adventure in life is loving someone completely." Maeve stood at the graveside, supported by her children, and watched as they lowered her husband into the earth of the mountains he'd called home. She didn't cry, though her heart was breaking. Sebastian wouldn't have wanted tears. He'd want her to remember the joy, the laughter, the love. That night, alone in the cabin for the first time in decades, Maeve sat by the fire and let herself grieve. She talked to Sebastian as she'd once talked to animals, pouring out her heart to the empty air, trusting that somehow, somewhere, he could hear her. "I'm not angry," she whispered. "We had more years than most people get, and they were good years. But I miss you already. Miss your laugh, your warmth, the way you'd look at me like I was the most precious thing in your world." A sound at the door made her look up. A wolf stood there, smaller than Gray had been, with distinctive silver markings on its face. It shouldn't have been able to open the door. Maeve should have been afraid. Instead, she smiled. "Come in, friend." The wolf padded into the cabin and laid its head in her lap. As Maeve stroked its fur, she felt a peace settle over her. The world was strange and beautiful, full of connections she didn't fully understand. But she'd learned to listen, to trust her heart. And her heart told her that Sebastian's love was all around her still, in the mountains and the animals and the family they'd created together. She lived for another 7 years, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, still caring for animals until the very end. She passed away quietly one spring morning, sitting in the chair Sebastian had built for her, looking out at the mountains where she'd found her home and her love. They buried her beside Sebastian on the hill, under a sky so blue it hurt to look at. Their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren gathered to say goodbye, to share stories, to celebrate a love that had lasted a lifetime and built a legacy of kindness and strength. "Tell us again how they met," one great-grandchild asked. "She was talking to a wolf," Rose said, her voice strong despite her tears. She was elderly herself now, but her eyes still sparkled with her mother's spirit. She treated him like a person, and your great-grandfather heard her. He said it showed she had a heart that listens. And he fell in love with her right then, though he didn't know it yet. And they lived happily ever after? The child asked. Rose looked at the two graves, side by side under the mountain sky, and smiled through her tears. Yes, sweetheart, they absolutely did. Years later, the cabin still stood, maintained by generations of the family Sebastian and Maeve had created. It became a tradition for newlyweds in the family to spend their first night there, sleeping in the room where it had all begun. The walls held photographs spanning decades, showing a love story that had started with a woman who talked to animals and a mountain man who recognized the beauty in that gift. And sometimes, visitors to the cabin reported seeing wolves on the property, always in pairs, watching over the place with yellow eyes full of wisdom. The family would smile when they heard those stories. They knew their great-grandparents' love was the kind that transcended death, the kind that left echoes in the mountains and the wind and the hearts of every creature that called those peaks home. Thomas Brennan's great-great-grandson, another Sebastian, brought his new bride to the cabin for their wedding night. As they stood on the porch watching the sunset, a pair of wolves appeared at the edge of the clearing. The young woman gasped, but Sebastian just smiled. "Don't be afraid," he said. "That's just family." The wolves watched for a moment, then turned and disappeared into the forest, their forms seeming to shimmer in the fading light. And for just a moment, the couple could have sworn they saw two people walking hand in hand between the trees. A large man with silver hair and a woman with copper curls, forever young, forever in love, forever home in the mountains they'd chosen together. The love story of Maeve and Sebastian Caldwell became legend in those mountains, passed down through generations, a reminder that sometimes the greatest adventures begin with kindness, that strength and gentleness go hand in hand, and that a heart that truly listens can hear more than words. It can hear the language of wolves and wind and wild places. It can hear love in all its forms. And it can recognize, in a single moment, the soul that was meant to walk beside it through all the days and all the years, building a life of purpose and joy and laughter that echoes long after the final sunset. Their story lived on in the mountains they'd loved, in the animals they'd cared for, in the family they'd built together, and in the hearts of everyone who heard about the woman who talked to animals like people, and the mountain man who said it showed she had a heart that listens, and how that recognition had sparked a love that lasted lifetimes.